Okay, so have you ever noticed how, like, just the simple act of going to the doctor can make you feel kind of powerless?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like you're stuck in that weird gown,
Yeah.
answering all these personal questions,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're not just you anymore. You're
Right.
like a patient.
You become like this body being examined.
Exactly. And there's this whole set of expectations for how you're supposed to act.
Totally. It's fascinating how our physical bodies become like entangled with these systems of power, you know?
And that's exactly what we're diving into today with a brilliant, and I gotta say, surprisingly relevant, Michel Foucault.
Oh, he's essential.
Get ready to explore his ideas on body power because he's going to change the way you see the world around you.
Absolutely. Foucault really helps us understand that power isn't this thing, imposed from above, like just by kings or governments.
Yeah.
It's actually woven into the very fabric of society, you know?
Wow.
It operates in these subtle ways on our bodies and in our everyday lives.
Okay, so no more kings and queens calling the shots, right?
Yeah.
Like, how did this whole power dynamic actually change over time?
Well, Foucault argues that, like, back in the 17th century, the king's body was the political reality.
Hmm.
Think about it. Public displays of punishment, torture, executions. It was all about showing off the monarch's absolute power.
Yeah, makes sense.
But then, as you move into the 19th century, that focus kind of shifted to the social body, the population as a whole.
So instead of just, like, publicly punishing individuals, power became more about, what, controlling everyone?
Exactly, controlling the masses.
And how did they do that?
The methods changed, right? So instead of public executions, you start to see things like quarantine to control disease, or even eugenics, which aim to, like, improve the population through selective breeding.
Hold on, improve the population. That sounds a little, I don't know.
Yeah, it gets a little creepy, right?
Yeah, it does.
That's the thing about power. It often hides behind good intentions.
Right.
These new methods, they were presented as more humane, more scientific, but were they really? I mean, they still exerted control over bodies.
It's in a less obvious way.
Exactly. Less visible, more insidious.
Okay, so less about the iron fist and more about, like, invisible strings controlling society.
A perfect way to put it.
I'm starting to see where this is going. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Trading iron shackles for, like, invisible strings?
So how do those invisible strings actually work? How do we go from, like, chopping off heads in the public square to controlling whole populations?
Well, Foucault says this new form of power, it works through what he calls the investment of the body.
Okay.
And it's not just about, like, outside forces controlling us,
Oh, yeah.
but about us, like, internalizing that discipline ourselves.
Okay, so it's less about someone telling us what to do and more about us, like, just accepting those expectations.
Yes, precisely. Think about it like gym culture today.
Right.
All the pressure to have that perfect body, the constant self-improvement stuff, those are always we're disciplining ourselves,
To
right?
fit in.
To conform, exactly, to these societal norms, even though we might not even realize it's happening.
It's like those norms, they become part of us.
Yes.
Almost like we're policing ourselves.
Exactly. And Foucault even says, like, our anxieties, our desires,
Yeah.
those are shaped by this whole interplay of power and discipline, too.
Can you give me an example of that? Because this is getting a little too real for me.
Okay, well, Foucault talks about this panic around sexuality in children.
Okay.
That kind of popped up in the 18th century.
Interesting.
Suddenly, everyone's super anxious about controlling children's sexuality, monitoring it, analyzing it. And it's not about liberation, right?
No.
It's about regulation, control. It's about shaping how people understand their own bodies and desires.
So we create these problems almost.
Yeah.
To have more control.
I mean, it's not always that intentional or calculated, but you're definitely picking up on something crucial here. Foucault wants us to see how power, surveillance, knowledge, they're all tangled up together,
Right.
shaping our experiences, how we see ourselves, the whole deal.
Okay, so how does Marxism play into this? Because wasn't Foucault writing at a time when a lot of thinkers were really focused on the state, like the government being that ultimate power structure?
Right. And Foucault agreed that the state, yeah, it's a major player, but he felt like traditional Marxism, so focused on class struggle,
Yeah.
it missed these more subtle ways power actually operates on us, on individuals.
So he wasn't just interested in the big picture stuff.
Exactly. He wanted to understand how power functioned at the level of, like, our bodies, our desires, our everyday interactions, all those little things.
Interesting.
He called those micro powers. These subtle ways were influenced and controlled without even knowing it.
So instead of power being this big, scary monster. It's more like, what? It's everywhere, all around us, like we're swimming in it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And Foucault argues one of the places this is happening in a really fascinating way is in the field of psychoanalysis.
Now, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, therapy, it seems like a force for good, right?
Right.
Helping people.
Helping people understand their unconscious desires, their motivations, all that.
Yeah.
But see, that's the paradox.
How so?
Because who gets to decide what's normal and abnormal when it comes to psychology?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Who benefits from those labels?
Right.
Right. It's tricky.
Okay, so he's suggesting that even something meant to be helpful, like therapy, could be another way that power operates on us.
Precisely. And this is where Foucault really pushes us,
Yeah.
to think critically about even our most basic assumptions about, like, knowledge, freedom, even just self-understanding.
This is blowing my mind. So we've talked about kings and quarantine and gym selfies and even therapy. Is there anywhere this body power concept doesn't apply?
Yeah, that's the thing about Foucault, right? His ideas are like these intellectual hand grenades.
Haha.
They just explode all our neat little categories and assumptions.
Right.
He wants us to see that power is everywhere,
Okay.
operating in these sneaky, often invisible ways.
Wow.
Shaping our bodies, desires, our sense of self, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so it's like this invisible force field.
Think of it more like a mosaic, actually.
The mosaic.
Yeah, Foucault himself uses that metaphor, It's not just one big thing. It's a whole network of, like, forces, institutions,
Okay.
practices from schools to hospitals, even our own families. It's wild.
And we're all caught in this web.
Pretty much, yeah.
So what do we do about it? Like,
Yeah.
if power is this sneaky and everywhere, how do we even begin to fight back?
That's where Foucault gets really interesting, right?
Okay.
He doesn't believe in some, like, massive revolution that will just, like, overthrow power completely.
Okay.
Instead, he's all about resistance.
Resistance, okay.
But he sees it happening in these small, everyday acts, these little acts of defiance.
Give me an example, because I'm having trouble picturing that. What does resistance look like in this world where power is so, like, ingrained in everything?
Okay, well, think about it. Anytime someone challenges a stereotype
Okay.
or refuses to conform or speaks truth to power, even if it's in a small way,
Yeah.
that's an act of resistance.
So it's not necessarily about, like, storming the Bastille.
Ah, exactly.
It's more about just, like, recognizing those little power dynamics and then figuring out how to disrupt them in your own way.
Exactly. Foucault was really interested in how we could use knowledge and self-awareness as tools to
Interesting.
challenge those assumptions we have about who we are, how we're supposed to live, all that stuff we just accept without thinking.
So it's almost like the first step to freeing ourselves from power is understanding how it actually works.
That's the idea. Knowledge is power, right? But
Yeah.
it's not enough to just know facts.
Right.
It's about really getting how these forces are shaping our lives.
Wow.
And then, finding ways to resist, to carve out our own spaces of freedom.
This is all pretty mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, Foucault will do that to you.
So listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into Foucault's ideas, we want to leave you with this: pay attention.
Pay attention to those subtle ways power is working in your own life,
Where do you feel that pressure to conform?
Where do you sense your own desires being shaped by those external forces? It's kind of freaky when you start to notice it.
It really is. But once you start to see those invisible strings, you can start to untangle them.
And maybe, just maybe, you can help create a world where those strings have a little less power over us all.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
We'll catch you next time.